Hello, and welcome to the Crypto Beat, where we discuss what's happening right now in the crypto space. My name is Tim Copeland, and I'm the editor-in-chief of The Block. I'm joined by my co-host, Sarah Wynn, who's a policy reporter at The Block, and our guest today is Mysten Labs Chief Legal Officer, Kevin Boon. Welcome to the show. How are you doing?
Hi, Tim. I'm Sarah. I'm doing great. Really excited to be here. Thank you so much for having me on the show.
Awesome. Thank you. So today's episode is around policy in the US. So Kevin, since Trump's win, has it felt like a mood change for companies like Mysten Labs?
Oh, absolutely. I think, I'm actually in DC. I'm in a hotel room in DC today, and I spent the week at the Policy Summit by Blockchain Association and just done a bunch of meetings on the Hill this week. And the energy is tremendous. It's a massive sea change. I think you've had people that have been monitoring this, hoping for it. But if you're working in our space and you came in too early, there's a chance that you left disappointed. But I think especially if you're an attorney working in the space right now, you're super excited about everything that's happening. It's blue skies, and we can get into all the details, but tremendous energy.
Cool. And sort of big news in the last few weeks was Paul Atkins getting nominated as the next SEC chair. What approach do you think he'll have over the next few years?
I love that it is Paul, and I love that if you look at who Paul's going to be working with, you have Mark and Hester. And as of right now, it looks like there's a chance that it'll be the three of them. They've all worked together before, so I think they can really hit the ground running. And in fact, one of the things that they talked about in the last few days was really the near-term things that they can do, the longer-term things they can do. And on stage, Hester and Mark were very clear about there are immense things that they want to change right off the bat. The first thing is the regulation by enforcement perspective and angle, and really the culture of the SEC and the reputation that they have. I think Hester, she's actually always, for the last couple years, always had her door open. Anytime she travels, she says to folks, GCs, anyone really, come talk to me. Like, sit down with me, have a cup of coffee, and bring your ideas. She's always been on the mantra of, don't just complain, bring your ideas. And so she has heard so much. And so there's a lot of ideas, a lot of things that are pent up. And that specific thing that she does of opening the doors to industry is the very first thing that will change. The idea that now when you go and speak to the commissioners, when you go and speak to the SEC, it's a friendly tone. It's an inviting tone. There's not going to be any weird, hey, be careful of what you tell me. It could come back on you through the enforcement arm. It's really, let's be collaborative. Let's begin a relationship with industry. And so I think you'll see a lot of, I hope, I don't know any of this stuff. I'm just guessing like Sarah, I'm sure you are. But I think day one, if we were to see a statement out from the SEC saying, hey, this is our stance on things around SAB 121, regulation by enforcement, a change in culture, just those types of commissioner statements will set the tone that will go very, very far. And then over the course of the next 30 days, 60 days, you'll see more meaningful changes. The digital chamber actually came out yesterday. It's on the internet around like their work on specific priorities. I would recommend everyone to take a look at it because they have the input from the commissioners. They've talked to the commissioners about it, and it's really quite excellent.
So was that a real worry then when you were speaking to the SEC previously, as though almost like they read you your Miranda rights? Anything you say can be used against you. Was that a real concern?
Yes, we had very little direct engagement on the Mysten Labs side. Thankfully, it was part of a larger strategy as well. But I think the circles are small when you're speaking to the other protocol level GCs, and you hear of the Wells notices, you hear about the attitude and the things that have happened by reading complaints. I think you can't help but believe that, hey, there is significant risk if I should choose to engage. And certainly if I choose to engage and I say the wrong thing, there's a chance that it could come back on my company. It could come back on the industry or the vertical within that you operate. I think the other problem with that then is you wouldn't know what is the wrong thing to say. You might be in a meeting and you might think I'm on perfectly solid ground, but actually you're not. And that type of uncertainty means then that the SEC is not getting quality industry engagement. You are not getting a meeting of the minds. You're not really understanding people's positions until you end up realizing you concluding, oh, you actually don't want to know what industry position is. That's why I do look back at Hester and I appreciate more in hindsight what she was doing, because I think it must be terribly difficult to take a stance in a subtle way that you are open to industry, you are open to talking when all of the other things are going on around you. You're trying to stand as an emblem of something different. So I don't think I truly appreciated that until now that I can see in hindsight. It's a wonderful thing that she did.
Yeah, I mean, talking about Hester, I mean, she must have been frustrated for the last few years to be sort of very open-minded to all of this and clearly not be able to make those sorts of decisions. And so she ends up in a position where she's sort of objecting to the decisions her agency's making, but ultimately not being able to make the decisions she wants to make. And now, obviously, she seemed like she didn't want to be SEC chair, but it seems like she's going to have a much bigger role going forward. Like, do you think it's quite like freeing for her that now over the next few years she's actually going to get listened to and be taken seriously rather than have to continuously just object to everything?
Absolutely. And I think, this was also, she talked about this with Mark on stage. And I think the expression screaming into a void was used jokingly. And so all these ideas that she's had and the perspectives that she had, she can now actually do something about it. Her hands were tied before. And I think that working with Paul will empower her, will enable her to work thoughtfully on the things that they collectively agree are the direction to take our industry. The reason I say it that way is because they're all very, very thoughtful. And what I do worry about is everyone knows that the three remaining commissioners are Republican appointed. And I think that if you take too heavy a stance and you go in hard, you will worry that it will actually cause partisanship and then in the future undo some of the good work that they're trying to do now. And so if you're if you're hitting that reset switch, I think I expect to see that they are going to make sure that they are taking a line that they'd be comfortable taking in the near term, but also one that they can preserve in the long term.
Okay, and what legacy do you think Gary Gensler left?
I there's so much hate that our industry has put out against Gary, and of course, you can understand that. But my personal view, I've never met Gary. I don't know what he's like as a human being. I would never really choose to bring it and make it personal. I think that Gary was being principled, and in his view, he stuck to his principles, and he did what his administration was expecting him to do. And I think that he can sleep at night because when he thinks on did I do my job, he, I believe, fully believes that he did the job that he thought he was supposed to do. And so, did he do damage to our industry? Absolutely. Um, do I have any personal animus against him? No, but that is not how many folks in our space actually feel.
And how are you viewing the SEC and the CFTC's roles in regulating crypto at present?
Present, well, we're on this cusp. I'd say they're tremendously important. I think that if we really want to see legislation and we want to see the normalization of the industry that we all hope for, when you're looking at the crash cycles, you're looking at the volatility that we all have in markets, in crypto markets. You look at the lack of talent in our space. Uh, the regulatory framework I think, is the most important factor that impacts all of that. And when we look at the opportunity we have in front of us, when you speak to the congressman, when you speak to the CFTC or the SEC, or you listen to them speak, you can sense this urgency because the momentum is there now. And I think you have a year. You have basically a year to see a lot of the major things you want to have change because after a year, I think the House of Representatives is going to turn over and they're going to start looking at, hey, how do I position myself in my reelection? And I think you might get distracted. The administration might get distracted by other things because there's so many things to do. And so while we have industry focus, I think industry needs to align and you need to see the regulators, especially the CFTC and the SEC, collaborate. And the feeling that I got when I listened to them, their panels at the summit were back to back. They were very collaborative. You can sense that, hey, maybe a plan here is in the very first early days, the SEC puts forth a line on, hey, what is outside the bounds of my jurisdiction? Full stop. They do that as fast as possible. They, in tandem, Congress is drafting legislation and the CFTC is butting up their jurisdiction and their scope against that boundary. Now, that I think is a very organic way to do it. If you are looking at something a little more complicated, there's all sorts of things that have been thrown out there. Well, if there's a middle space in between the CFTC and the SEC, maybe there should be the birthing of a new regulator. Maybe you should see Trump lean in with executive orders and actually lean in with direction. And I think one of the big questions is what David Sachs and the crypto and AI czar will do, because I think that we know I can get a sense from listening at these panels to what the CFTC and the SEC are looking at, but it is still hard to figure out what the "Make America Great Again" perspective is. What David Sachs is going to focus on in early days. That to me is still a little bit of a question mark. I think though, if you're thinking about it practically, he's probably looking to see what the regulators are going to do. He's trying to see, hey, now that we have this reset switch, are you going to lean in? Are you going to seize the opportunity?
And just a quick question too on the CFTC. Have you heard anything? Because I know we have an SEC chair that's named and a crypto czar. Have you heard anything about who could be the next CFTC chair as well, and kind of what aspects would they have that would be good for the role?
I can talk about it because all of crypto Twitter, but Brian from A16Z, his name has been put out there. I think that would be a tremendous choice. And I'm naturally biased. A16Z is one of the, our lead investor at Mysten Labs. I've talked to Brian a few times, but even if I hadn't had that connection and that bias, if you've talked to Brian, there are certain characteristics that he has. He's extremely friendly. He's easy to talk to. He's humble. That level of humility and that type of engagement, I think, will go very, very far if you are trying to talk to industry. All the things that I mentioned before about the SEC and this kind of leaning in towards industry connections and speaking to people again. Summer at the CFTC has said the same thing. I think she emphasized how you want to see lab CFTC grow again. You want to see open doors and opening those types of those communication. So I think whoever comes in, if it's Brian, would very much lean into that direction as well.
What sort of approach would you want the CFTC and the SEC to take in regulating crypto?
I would like them to take a proactive approach initially, because my biggest fear is that we take too long and we lose the momentum. And the reason that I feel that way is, as a protocol layer, Mysten Labs' purpose in existence is to create foundational infrastructure. As a protocol layer, we have interests and risks and things that we care about that are pretty distinct from what you care about if you're an exchange, or if you are strictly a DeFi protocol, or if you are a qualified custodian. And so I think we care more broadly about ecosystem health. Maybe you get heavier into token issuances and the American return to innovation story, those types of things. But really what we want is market structure. We want market structure first and foremost. And if I'm trying to get to market structure, and I know that a market structure bill is hairy, is the hard thing to put out there, probably more complicated than stablecoins. Stablecoins, I expect to see that legislation come earlier. Then I would love to see the CFTC and the SEC act quickly while Congress works on a market structure bill. I'm here talking about the things that I'm observing, just so folks know. My background is not in policy. I'm the chief legal officer at Mysten Labs, but my history is very much as a product guy. I love the idea of David Sachs stepping in selfishly because he feels like my people. He's known to me, that type Silicon Valley investor. I've spent most of my career as a product lawyer in the Valley.
And no, I hear what you're saying too, like with the blockchain summit, how they had the back-to-back sessions with the SEC and CFTC, and I hear what you're saying too, where it looks really collaborative. I think even Commissioner Mersinger was sitting in the crowd, I think is what I remember them hearing.
Yeah.
And so she was also listening to both commissioners, the SEC commissioners as well. So I hear you on that.
What sort of clarity do you think we might see in 2025?
If they're aggressive, um, I think that you can very much see stablecoin legislation. I think that is top of mind, and it's stablecoins conceptually. If you look at the type of crypto agenda and the things that are easily understood to things that are harder to understand, I think very easy is Bitcoin, the value of ETFs, the premise of it as a store of value, the entire pitch for it to be a reserve, a strategic reserve. Those things are simpler to grasp. Then one shade away from that, you get into stable coins. And I think that is where you start to ruffle some feathers. You start to see some difficulty because stable coins, there's a narrative around stable coins of actually strengthening the dollar dominance around the world. And I think to me, that's the one that I think of the most. And I agree with that. And I think it's very important to be able to maintain the strength of the dollar and that stable coins ultimately contribute to that. Then there is the narrative, though, that stablecoins are erosive of the US dollar's influence on the rest of the world. And I think that argument there is going to have to play out. And there are parties today that have not traditionally been involved in those conversations. I think banks, for example, traditional finance has been largely silent. If you were, I want, I'm not in all these conversations, so I don't really know. But I would say, from an outsider looking in, I'd say there are constituents that I would guess would care that have not voiced up, and that they will start to care if you start to see this trend towards mainstream finance, traditional finance instruments being digitized, real world assets coming out the chain. That will invite other players that have other concerns complicating the situation. But stablecoins are still easier to understand than something like market structure. When you're getting into market structure and you're now talking about the full broader crypto ecosystem, you have to start tackling incredibly hard things that Fit2Anyone made an amazing attempt to do and will forever be like French Hill's legacy. The idea of what really is a digital asset, what is a decentralized version of a digital asset, when are digital asset securities, when are they not? The core questions, those get handled, I think, most fulsomely in a market structure bill. When we hear Make America Great Again narratives around US coins issued by US teams potentially getting tax preferred or tax advantage treatment, no taxes on crypto capital gains. Those questions around, well, then what is a US token issuer? Is a token issuer in the United States issuing a security? Are they not issuing a security? Does that thing, when it's born at TGE, is it already a non-security or is it flip? Looking at some of the stuff that is under Fit2Anyone, those are complicated things where definitions really matter. And I think that is the biggest beast to wrestle.
Going to raise the question of like DAOs and how that will play out, because obviously they're in sort of quite murky regulatory waters. But then also, if there's now an incentive to be a US company issuing a token, then suddenly all these companies that have set up foundations, set up DAOs to try and like make it hands off, suddenly like, actually, you know what, maybe okay, we will take ownership. Do you think could you see that changing and companies being like, no, that's our token now, like we're taking responsibility for it?
I mean, I frankly, at an L1, this is what I obsess about. This is what I care absolutely 100% the most about. And there's so many layers to it. There's, of course, the grandfathering idea of what happens to these coins and these project teams that are out there that have begun the path of progressive decentralization. And in that path of progressive decentralization, there is the legal decentralization aspect. And some of these are very far along. You have certain protocols out there that have entities with lab teams in the United States or other countries, and then a business development team for the community in another country, and then a token treasury that is held by a not-profit in another country. And the mantra that everyone in this space uses when you operate at this layer is no control. Can't have control, but you definitely need alignment, because if you don't have alignment, your ecosystem is not going to grow. The business model has always been no control but alignment. Figure out a way to get through that operational overhead of not really being able to work with each other as easily or as directly as you would like for a common good. That's why you keep seeing these expressions of collectives, of groups, because you're all striving for the same thing, but it's tremendously difficult. Part of that difficulty is this idea of forced legal decentralization. If I was to look at what I really care about in substantive decentralization, I think one, technical aspects of decentralization are tremendously important. What is your staking framework look like? Where are your validators located? How is consensus achieved? How many validators do you even have? What is the distribution of stake? How does that stake turn into voting rights for the protocol? And the reason you care about that is because that gets you to control. Control is really the key to decentralization. I think having these somewhat of facades around multiple entities talking to each other, doing different things, if you could do away with that, that's the dream. And I want that for not selfishly ourselves, but for the whole industry. When you look at projects that are trying to build, what we need to get to ultimately is a normalization against the rest of tech. If you're really talking about the return to US innovation, it is absurd that if you have a US builder who just wants to build something cool on a protocol, that they have to, instead of starting to build, learning a programming language, because it's probably not new to them, they have to think about, wait, what is this offshore stuff? What is this entity? I have to find someone else that I work with, that I kind of like, that I can trust, who is going to be my partner overseas. But that country overseas has no connection to you personally. You don't care about that country. You're never going to live there. You have no connections. That is a ridiculous fallacy that if you work in AI or you work in any other tech industry, you don't have to deal with. And that overhead and that type of risk is what prevents talent from coming into our space. Electric Capital just had their latest report come out in December. And I think now in all programming languages across the world, you've got 40,000 crypto developers. That's a rounding error. It's absurd when you look at how much talent is in the space. And why doesn't the talent come in? The talent doesn't come in because there's no regulatory clarity. If you're a Google or a Facebook engineer, you will only jump into crypto if you are getting paid such a premium, because you're the best of the best, right? If you're getting paid such a premium and you have such a healthy risk appetite, that risk premium that you're getting nets against the more certain money that you could make at a Google or a Facebook. That is a problem. That's a tremendous problem. You need to normalize this industry so that you can actually have those people in and they don't have to worry about these things anymore.
I mean, there's also a lot of value that can be created through that. I mean, there's one sort of big thing in crypto that I think people have known has potential, but have been wary of, is in terms of sort of protocol revenue. So a lot of these protocols can generate revenue, and then that revenue can either be, partially go to the team that's running it, and maybe partially to token holders. And I think part of the beauty, I mean, the thing I've always found most interesting about crypto is that it's programmable. So you can just, you have this money coming in, you just automatically program it to go to either all token holders or to, a portion back to the business. You can just code all of it and have it sort of, run very efficiently. And I think a lot of these protocols are generating good money. And then if you can have these American businesses start to, profit from this money, and then that creates a lot of, business potential in the US.
I completely agree. And I think, at the protocol level, you watch certain KPIs and how much money your protocol, how much revenue the protocol is actually generating is one of those core KPIs. And you can, like you said, program that. You can control the flow of funds. You can see, hey, who should be via smart contract the recipient of these funds. I think that should be something that is considered when you're looking at controlling decentralization. If the entire pot of funds is going to the same entity and that entity is making all the decisions and, you have the control. And so if you really want to be decentralized, I think revenues, where the funds go, all of these things can have an aspect in how you consider whether or not control exists.
What sort of tax treatment do you think would work best for crypto?
Oh man, this is part of that part that I just talked to you about. What I really want for American teams to be able, American-based talent to be able to launch projects here unfettered. It has to do with incentives. Look at where the incentives are, and you will find the result of where talent goes. if you can launch a project today, if you want to launch a project today and you pay the overhead, you have all these attorneys that will tell you, hey, structure your company or this company that you won't be at, the foundation in X country, and that country is tax advantaged compared to what you would pay if that project was launched in the United States. So let's assume for a second that the unregistered securities risk is gone. We've solved that. The industry has gotten past that. You still have the IRS problem. The IRS problem of, okay, well, corporate taxes, 30%. If you need to figure out how to have operating capital, and actually that involves the sale of some of your assets, and you have a protocol coin, there's taxes on that revenue every minute. There is the event at TGE of the birthing of potentially value that causes taxation issues. All of those things that you need to care about because the margins matter. If you can't fundraise through, not every team is going to be able to fundraise massive amounts through a VC, and you have to bootstrap things. So the builders of those applications that we hope will get to mass adoption, and you don't have the financial wherewithal, then every penny matters. And so when you're left with a choice of, hey, do I launch in country X where there's an effective corporate tax rate of 0 versus launching in United States where you're going to be paying 30% above, that's a massive decision for you to make. And so if we really want to have innovation come back, we need to look at the incentive structure, and tax is that incentive structure. Tax advantage or tax-free treatment. Do I think that will happen? That would be incredible. And, we heard rumors around that, but I haven't seen anything too real, but one can hope.
Yeah. Do you think the Howey test is still relevant?
Absolutely. I mean, the Howey test has stood the test of time for a very long time outside of the crypto context. Do I think that it is the precise test, and do I think it is exactly the right one to apply to our industry? No, I don't think it is nuanced enough, and I think some of the concepts are a little bit too outdated. But I think that instead of trying to change the Howey test, a real way to do it is to circumvent it entirely. You instead talk about digital assets, or an example of why the Howey test is still relevant, for example, is certain digital assets should be subject to the Howey test because they should be securities. Security tokens, things as real world assets come into play, and you introduce mainstream finance concepts, things that are already going to be governed under the SEC as securities. The vision of real world assets is to first put on place kind of like the primitives, the dumb things, like let's put oil and gold on chain. But then after that, you're going to securitize them. You're going to want to slice and dice them. You're going to, if old world finance comes in, there's going to be any number of creative things that they do. And so for instruments that are governed by securities laws today, the Howey test should apply to them. And I think the industry would embrace that. It's all the other stuff. It's protocol tokens, stable coins. These things should not be misconstrued as securities under a Howey test.
And a quick question too, there's still SEC Chair Gary Gensler is still at the SEC now until January 20th. And I know too, we talked about Wells notices a little bit earlier, but could we see more Wells notices coming out of the SEC in the next few weeks? There was news this past week that both Unicoin and CyberKongs received those notices saying that there could be enforcement actions brought against them. I guess, what do you see happening next with that?
The CyberKongs Wells notice did surprise me. I had thought it had started getting a little bit quiet, and I think that sent a wake-up call to industry that we're not quite in the clear yet. And I think that if you are trying to preserve issues where you thought there were issues in our space, you're the existing administration, and you want to preserve issues and earmark them and just have it be a topic of discussion, or in your legacy, make sure that that, hey, I saw that this was an issue, and people should just give it pause, then you still could see more Wells notices. The issue is that these Wells notices don't just come out of thin air. These Wells notices are usually half expected because there's been a dialogue with the SEC, sometimes for years. And so I think for the folks that have been engaged with the SEC and have been having these talks, there is a legitimate fear that they should have that they could receive something in the next 2 weeks or so. But, it's 2 weeks, so time is limited.
I wonder if it's just the, staff of the SEC, if they've been working 2 years on an enforcement action, you don't want that to go to waste. You might as well,
Yeah,
have something to show for it.
that's right. That's right. And then people are human. If you like I talked about with Gary, if you believe in what you're doing, you truly believe, and you believe that the rest of the industry is going in the wrong direction, I don't think they would have a problem pushing these things out. You can sleep at night because you believe in what you're doing. We're all human. So, like you said, I think if you put 2 years of your life into this, and you've been drafting and drafting and drafting and working with it, and you really think it's important, yeah, I think there's a chance you'll see more in the last 2 weeks.
Yeah. The other thing that sort of I don't know to say come out the SEC, but is in the darling of the SEC, Prometheum. Where does like the change of leadership lead them? Because like right now, the SEC they seem to be the only project the SEC endorses, but obviously Prometheum's taking quite a different approach to everyone else. Like next year, is it going to flip the other way, or is Prometheum still going to be the only business that the SEC will allow?
I'm very curious about that. I wouldn't think that it would be the only business that the SEC would allow. I think the Prometheum approach has been isolating when I think of it for them. And in many ways, I don't know that team. I admire that they kind of did their own thing and went against the tide. But if the tide is turning now, they need to strategize on, hey, where do we sit in this? Is there an opportunity to turn lemons into lemonade and lean more heavily and try and grow their business more, even isolating themselves further, which could be a counter position, or do they try now and downplay their uniqueness, downplay the past positions that they've had? It's a pretty strategic thing, because just by way of example, it is not uniform that the whole industry is going to be embracing digital assets. I think about the states. I think about those other parties that I mentioned that have not yet been involved. Those voices, those counter voices to digital assets, I think will emerge. And in fact, we are just one disaster away from public minds and public consensus turning as well. That's why we really need to get this done in the next year. If you see another FTX-like event, if you see something where Main Street has invested money and they lose money, I think that could give pause even to the administration. And so we have to worry about these things and move as quickly as possible. But so there are going to be dissenting voices. And so if you're Prometheum, you could ally with some of those dissenting voices and carve out that uniqueness for yourself, even in the next couple years.
Yeah, I mean, with FTX, I feel like it was quite interesting that happened, and it didn't notably change perception too much. Obviously, there was it was a very big event, it did cause a lot of damage. But if anything, crypto sort of the momentum continued and then built up into where we are today, where it became like a major political issue. So I guess there's risk it could, with FTX, it set us back maybe like a year or two. So yeah. I guess if that happened now, then if you're saying that next year is going to be like a really valuable year for policy, a setback right now would be really bad timing.
That's right. That's right. I don't want any setbacks. I don't want anything that is going to affect hearts and minds in a negative way when there's so much positivity around Bitcoin and positivity around our industry. The main thing that we need to get to that normalization that I mentioned is the removal of this stigma. Oh, and we haven't even talked about it, but I think 2.0, those efforts are going to fade very, very quickly. And that is so critically important because it's the stigma that keeps talent out. It's the stigma that perpetuates that fear about our industry. We need that normalization because we need to, selfishly from a tech perspective, compete with other emerging technologies on the same level playing field.
Talking of momentum, how important was Ripple's win over the SEC earlier this year?
Oh, I mean, I think very important. That just set the stage. That gave everyone hope. It gave everyone the first glimpses that the landscape could change, and that wait a second, maybe there is a future for the whole industry. That in many ways was the start of so much of this regulatory positivity. I think anyone can have a feeling about Ripple, XRP, or whatever, but from a legal perspective, we owe a tremendous debt of gratitude to that project.
And two, just going back, you mentioned debanking. I think that's something that's been on lawmakers' minds, especially recently. We've also mentioned a market structure bill that is likely to be introduced, as well as a bill to regulate stablecoins. Wanted to kind of get your ideas too on taxes. That seems to be the first item on lawmakers' agenda, given that the Tax Cuts and Jobs Act is going to expire, I think, at the end of 2025. I guess out of those interests and ones that you've mentioned as well, what is Mysten Labs most focused on and why?
You mean of the different regulatory changes and proposals that can come out, including taxes, what are we most focused on? I mentioned it is market structure. I'd say in order, um, I care about the ending of Operation Choke Point and making sure that debanking stops, both for our industry and also just because I think it's a little bit un-American, and is a big barrier to wealth generation, and economic empowerment. Everything that I've chosen to do in my career has always been around this concept of wealth generation, not really money generation, but wealth generation. And so debanking feels particularly dirty to me, when you have a business that is perfectly legitimate but just frowned upon and in weird ephemeral ways. So I would love to see that change because it's part of that stigma. I think choke point has a lot to do with that stigma. If you're working with a business and you're getting these signals of, hey, don't provide them with banking services, you immediately will jump to, oh, I shouldn't touch you. You're not legitimate. There's something bad about your business. So I love to see that go away. Next, after that, there's the stablecoin stuff that I also likewise care about. There are stablecoins that are on our protocols, and stablecoins, we're all searching for that magical use case. We're all searching for those use cases that have product market fit that get to mass adoption and bring in like the mainstream. Stablecoins are leading that charge. So they're a critical piece to that. So I'm not interested in stablecoins from an issuer perspective or from a money making perspective for our company, but I am interested in stablecoins because the whole industry just needs more product market fit. And stablecoins are a critical part to all the interesting payments and commerce use cases. On top of that, then the third one is market structure, as I mentioned. That's tremendous. That's where we get to the bread and butter of how ecosystems grow and how token issuing happens. Also on this list is BSA and AML. I think we're getting there. We're getting to more clarity on the risks and non-risks to self-hosted wallets. When is it that you have these KYC obligations that are getting triggered? At the Blockchain Association Policy Summit, there were exploratory conversations around very creative changes to the requirements around KYC for BSA and AML. And that, to me, I think is particularly difficult. I would be very surprised to see major changes for our industry in moving that needle even further to leniency, but it could happen. I think those are the top issues that Mysten Labs focuses on.
Jumping briefly to the EU, do you think MiCA is going to result in further crypto uptake, or do you think it will hinder adoption?
I think it will further uptake. I think that I look to the EU and MiCA much the same way when we were looking at privacy changes, just enormous monolithic regulatory frameworks that change the industry, but also guide it. And so if you are trying to build, they've had the advantage now of, if you were trying to build and you were in the EU, you had the advantage now of knowing what your framework was going to be and trying to figure out where you were within that framework for a long time. It's been like a year over since you started seeing the first whisperings of what MiCA would be. I also like that we are not subject to MiCA. U.S. teams, U.S. builders, and that our congressmen get the advantage of being able to look at how it goes and pluck ideas from it and synergize the things that we think are effective and draw inspiration from it. This is not really a new paradigm. Oftentimes they are the first. So in that way, it's a great advantage for us in the U.S.
What are your thoughts on the SEC Democratic Commissioner Carolyn Crenshaw's renomination vote being thrown out in the last week?
This goes back to the earlier things that we were discussing over the composition of the commissioners. It is good for industry in the perspective that if you look at her track record when it comes to crypto issues, has been the greatest. Some not nice things have been said about her all over crypto Twitter. But as much as we may celebrate that she's not getting renominated, I think we do need to be careful because we want to see our industry put in place lasting changes. And if you see the remaining commissioners take things that are too much along party lines, which, like I said, I think they're really thoughtful and they won't, then you open yourself up to criticism for that. And then you open yourself to criticism that, hey, when this thing was baked, it was baked in an uneven playing field, and so it should be revisited. But I do trust that the commissioners that remain, like I said, are super duper thoughtful and very sensitive to this specific issue.
And on that too, I think during the Blockchain Association too, Commissioner Peirce and Commissioner Ueda also spoke about kind of their priorities, kind of short-term priorities. I guess kind of what are your thoughts? I know Commissioner Peirce has proposed like her regulatory sandbox idea just to like give projects time to get going before having to follow certain rules. I guess if it is the situation where there's 3 Republican commissioners and so that's all under one party, what do you see sort of like moving with that since there's kind of less friction with getting that done potentially?
You mean, sorry, the question is, where do I see it happening? I think there won't be any difficulty. The remaining commissioners are all aligned. They've all worked together. I think they know their working patterns. And so that's why from a velocity perspective, I think that the things that we're hearing and that they're signaling, we can expect will happen. There's no reason it shouldn't, because when we're listening to them on stage, it's 2 of the 3 commissioners, and Paul is I think going to be deferential in ways to the work that Mark and Hester, Commissioners Mark and Hester, are already doing. So I think yes, everything that we heard during that panel will come to pass and quickly.
Okay, and finally, what's on Mysten Labs' radar when it comes to legislation in the US?
When it comes to legislation, really the things that we talked about, I'm keeping my eyes open mostly for market structure. Right now, it's really funny because all the things that we're talking about, it's the pre-work. What's actually happening right now is a lot of people are looking for jobs in the change of administration. Staffers are all moving around, and people are getting ready for the next Congress to start. And all the things that we discussed today are going to have more certainty and have more clarity once Congress actually starts. And then we will see which direction everybody starts to lean into. And that's where the real work for me and the rest of the lawyers and people in policy has to happen. So everyone will go away for a little bit of a holiday because we don't need to worry about, where are we going to be sitting in all of this. But then when Congress starts, it's like, okay, maybe I need to take a lot of trips back to the Hill to actually see and hear what's going on. So the priorities are as I suspected and I described earlier, but what they will actually be will start once Congress starts.
Awesome. All right. Well, that's all we have for today. I want to thank Sarah and Kevin for joining. Make sure to follow us on Twitter, Twitch, and Spotify, and subscribe on YouTube, and continue to read The Block. Stay informed on everything crypto. See you next time.
Thanks, everybody.